begin with our first part of our workshop. The workshop really will have kind of two parts to it. First part is going to be on evangelization. We're really going to be introducing what this Ignite is all about, because it's not just the workshop. There's also something called Sunday Sparks as well as Upper Room. So we'll kind of explain that. Kind of the background too as to why we evangelize. Those who may have gone to School of Mission and Clear Path training may have heard some of that before, but we're not going to rehash everything that's in there, but just give us greater context. We'll use kind of an analogy or demonstration with the strange objects that are on the center of your tables. And then the second half of the workshop is then going to be on prayer, and we're going to look at specifically growing in 4 habits of relational prayer. Habits that we can apply to whatever form of prayer that we might be using. So that'll be the second half. We'll take a break in between. After those two, we'll be getting close to lunch. We'll be getting hungry, so we'll have some food, and then finish off with talking a little bit about the upcoming Sparks. Those of you that are on the southern ends this weekend, you'll have an opportunity to experience this weekend, and then be going up to the next weekend or to the northern parishes on the following weekend. So kind of back and forth. So, all right. So let's get into talking about why do we evangelize? What's the purpose of that? So for those I mentioned that were in School of Mission or Clear Path training, we're not just going to repeat everything that we said, but we do want to give a context further for what evangelization is all about. It goes to the very core of the mission that Jesus himself gives to us. We see this right at when Jesus is about to ascend back to heaven at the end of Matthew's Gospel. He gives this mission, the Great Commission is what it's called. Go therefore, teach all nations, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all I commanded you, and behold, I'm with you always, even until the end of the age. So the mission that Jesus gives to the apostles and to us, passing on through the centuries, it's a command. Go, do something. We are to go and make disciples of all nations. So we are to go and invite people to become followers of Jesus, to come to know him. There's a sacramental element to that, where baptism comes in. But there's also a formational aspect, teaching them things of the faith. And we'll see here too, and how are we going to be able to do it? Is because Jesus is with us, right? So in order to know that he's with us, that's where our relationship through prayer comes in as well. So everything that we talk about has its origin in the vision, the mission that comes from Jesus Christ himself, given to the church. Another way that he explained this idea of evangelizing, sharing the good news that Jesus was sent to give is the image of the salt and light that we find also in Matthew's Gospel. Jesus says, you're the salt of the earth and the light of the world. So you can think of, as Christians, we are to flavor the world around us with the good news of the gospel. That's really what evangelization is. It's just everything that we do that has to do with sharing the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We'll won't get into the how exactly we do that yet here, but everything that we do with regard to sharing the good news would be part of evangelization. Salt, that image, we could also think of it in terms of, we use salt for a preservative in food. So we're also trying to preserve the world around us from the powers of darkness by bringing Christ's light. So that matches right in with the second image of light as well. Light too so both salt and light aren't things that are for themselves. You don't necessarily just sit and eat a bunch of salt on its own, right? You put it in the food to bring the flavor out of the food. And that's the same way we are as Christians, is that we're not just to live for ourselves, but we're to go and to bring that flavor to those around us. Same thing with light. If all the lights were off in the basement here, you'd notice. But you probably didn't really think about the lights are on down here. Because we're so used to light is just there, and by it we see everything. So light isn't necessarily for itself, it is for the purpose of being able to see everything around us. And so the same way, for us as Christians, we are not just for ourselves, but we are also to go and be the light of the world, to help people to be able to see God's light, especially when there's so many around who may feel as though it's just simply darkness in our world today. The mission, the vision that comes from Jesus Christ, then has been particularized in a way for our specific area. Archbishop Lucas, several years ago, through coordinating and meeting with a bunch of people in all sorts of different parishes across the Archdiocese, began to formulate this into, well, what elements of this mission of evangelizing from Jesus, how do we describe it and talk about it in our church? And so we have our archdiocesan vision statement of one church encountering Jesus, equipping disciples, and living mercy. Hopefully by this time you've heard this on end. But this forms the background of what we are trying to do through Ignite as well. At this time, the Archbishop, there's the elements that come from it is it's not just, it's really about creating a culture around each of these different elements. So a culture is a way of living and thinking that really affects all aspects of parish life. These ideas are not just for those who happen to go to an Ignite workshop. These are things that need to begin to color the life of all aspects of parish life. So creating a culture of encountering Jesus and equipping disciples so that our parishes are places where people meet the Lord. If people are not meeting Jesus when they participate in our parish, then we have to wonder, what are we doing? Equipping disciples to help them, and that's what Jesus said, right? Go and make disciples, right? That means we have to be made. We have to be equipped. There has to be growth and formation. Otherwise, you're not becoming a disciple. A culture that enables God's mercy to be received and lived. Once we've received God, if we've really received the Lord, then we are overfilled with His life, and that will cause us to go and bring that life to others. And through our Ignite and future workshops, we want to get into, how we specifically discern with the Lord how each individually we're called to go and live that mercy, because it doesn't necessarily mean all of us are called to do it exactly the same way. And then creating a culture of unity as well with the one church, right? We want to be unified around Jesus' vision, around the vision of the Archdiocese, around this common culture and the way that we think about, what is parish life all about? As I mentioned on the previous slide, that evangelization is really the reason why we exist. I mean, this is our mission. This is why we exist. We don't just exist so that we can live a comfortable life. Jesus certainly didn't come for that purpose. Please ignore that the data doesn't come from our area. I couldn't find ours when I was putting this together, and so this is from my previous area. But the point that I wanted to point out is that the reason why we need to evangelize, we need to be convinced of this, is because, unfortunately, if you look at the blue bars represent those that don't consider themselves a part of any kind of faith, right? And so over time, even in our rural areas, this has continued to increase. There's more and more people who would consider themselves, what religion do you have? None. I don't have one. Right? So there's more and more of our neighbors, and it's not just in urban areas. Sometimes we might think that, well, that's a problem in the city, but not out here. Everybody. But if we really reflect upon it, we know it to be true. We know family members and neighbors, and that well, I think they're technically Catholic, but I don't think I've really ever seen them to come and participate in anything. And so our desire is that we want to be able to go. We want to be able to reach and bring the good news. That somehow, even if someone may have been raised in faith, or maybe their parents or grandparents may have been raised in faith, but now they have been, other things have become priorities in their life, or they've just slowly been drawn away. We want to be able to, propose the good news of the gospel to them as, this could be a source of hope and joy where maybe you're unable to find it in your current life, way of living. How that has affected our parishes, we also have, this is our statistics here from our 7 parishes. So, we have over time, just from the demographics in our rural areas, decreased in the amount of parishioners that we have and the amount of people living in our area. But we've also decreased in the participation in Mass attendance. So the top number is the number of parishioners that are technically on the books, and the orange one is the numbers that are actually attending Mass. So you can see that it has declined 63% down to just under 40%. And if trends continue the same way, we don't know if they will or not, but if we do nothing differently, we can't really expect things to make drastic changes, then it could continue to be rather dire as to how many participation in the faith. And it's not so much, our concern with the declining numbers shouldn't be that there won't be enough people to make sure that the church buildings stay open, or that we have enough people to do our activities and there won't be enough money for our parishes and things like that. That shouldn't, obviously that's, part of the reality of things that we can be concerned with the parish, but the greater concern ought to be that there's more and more people that are trying to live day after day after day without the Lord, right? That is really what our greatest concern would be. If we've met Jesus ourselves, we want others to know him as well, and so that should be our greatest concern. We want people not just so they can be another body in our church, so that our church doesn't close, but rather we want them to know Jesus Christ the way that we have come to know him. And so that's where evangelization comes in. Though when I use the term evangelization, some people might think this, right? That the main or only way to go and evangelize is you got to, go door to door, knock on people's door, and say, "Have you heard about Jesus?" And probably for a lot of us, we're like, "I'm not going to sign up for that," And we can. I have great respect for those who do that and are willing to go into that uncomfortableness and go and share their faith in that way. And there are Catholics who will go and do this. It may be a little bit easier to do that, perhaps where there's greater numbers of people and you don't know everybody in the community and things like that. It might be more difficult in smaller ones. But this is certainly not the only way of evangelizing. Evangelizing really has to do with more a one-on-one, beginning with the relationships that we already have, the connections we already have, whether it's through work or community or family or things like that. The method of for Jesus in evangelization is one of spiritual multiplication, where God sends his son Jesus, and then Jesus is going to gather around him individuals, the first disciples, right? And he's going to, in particular, he's going to invest in, even out of the 12 apostles, he's going to invest in 3 that you hear are around him all the time, Peter, James, and John, right? He's going to particularly invest in them as not only leaders in the church, but as these are the leaders in specifically evangelization. And then there's going to be the next step is the 12. And through the course of the Gospels too, we see how also we have the 72 disciples. We don't know all their names. They're not all listed. But then they too are then sent forth. So you begin to see that Jesus invests in a few, which invests in which each of those 3 invest in more, and then each of the 12. I'm sure it doesn't really go into all the details as to their relationship with one another, but I'm sure that Jesus couldn't individually meet one-on-one with all 72 of those when they're being sent out. I'm sure that he used the assistance of the apostles in helping. And so that's the way that the gospel is going to be spread throughout the centuries. We see this with St. Paul too, great evangelizer within the church. He also has his few numbers of individuals that he's going to spend time and invest in so that they themselves can then have their disciples, and then those will have their disciples, and slowly over time, this is how the church spreads. This is how the faith is passed on through those apostolic times. And so if you just run the math down, if you had a single person who's evangelizing 10,000 people every year, they can only do so many. But if you had a spiritual multiplier where you got one who invests in three, and each of those three invest in three, and each of those invest in three, and each of those invest in three, and each of those, suddenly you've got this ballooning effect. And that's how, Christianity came across the whole world. It wasn't because there was one or two people who did it all. It was because you've got individuals that invest in other people's lives in that way. And once they are on fire, then they are also going to invest in you. So that's kind of the framework of our hope for the change in culture within our parishes. Because right now it might seem like, well, there's only a few, there's only like 30 of us who want to participate in this. But slowly we want to spread out, and maybe in future workshops or in our Sunday Sparks that we do, we'll begin to invest, invite in more individuals, and can see this grow. And eventually, that'll come up. We start with those that are. Let me go back here. We start with those that are closest to Jesus, but we want to spread it out to those who may be far away. Yes?
Kevin, it's like inviting others to become inviters.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we have to give them some nourishment along the way, but that's what I think of when I look at that.
Yep. Inviting others to
And then
be.
no one's alone in this effort. And that's what's nice. You always have the Holy Spirit.
Yes. All right. So, with regard to evangelization, Pope Francis has been very much focused on evangelization. He wrote a whole document on the joy of the gospel, that if we've been affected by God's presence within our life, then we want to share that. We want to share that good news. We know that my life is different now that I know the Lord. And I see someone who might be struggling. I know their life could be different too if they know the Lord. And so the joy that we've experienced, that's what we want to share with others. So ultimately our Ignite program, while it's designed for those who might be closer to Jesus now, it's ultimately designed to reach out to those who may be far away. For those that were in School of Mission or Clear Path training, you've seen this before. For those that haven't been, you might not have seen this, but these are basically something the Archdiocese has presented, the thresholds of conversion and discipleship. Basically, what they're pointing out is that every single person is in a different spot in their walk with the Lord, right? Some people might be way on the end of where they're just barely, maybe not even trusting in God or His church in any way. Maybe they are even suspicious. But slowly, as you continue to come closer to God, you might get to trust or openness, to just listening or hearing people talk about it, to actively seeking, I want to learn more. I want to know more. And finally to a point where you might make a decision, yes, I'm going to make a commitment and I want to follow God more deeply. Beginning disciples then is focused on, I want to work on my own growth. But as you continue to be this disciple, God is going to challenge all of us to not just be turned in on my own personal growth, but now I want to go and share God's life with others. That's where missionary and fruitful disciples come in. So this formation that we're doing here is not really, that we're doing here today, is not really for those on this end. I mean, they're not here today. They may or may not even be in the pews. I suppose some of them might be in the pews where they might hear things like that and like, I'm not interested in anything like that. And that's okay. This is really designed this is evangelization formation that is designed for those of you that are on that further end, where you have a desire not just to grow in your own growth in the faith, but also have a desire to want to begin to share this with others as well. Some of you may feel like you may be feel like you're anywhere along there. You're like, I don't feel like I'm a fruitful disciple, or I'm a spiritual multiplier yet. But you are by the fact that you're here today, that you're on that end, and you have this desire as to, I want to grow not only in my own faith, but also to help others to grow in theirs as well. So our Ignite is, even though it is formation for those on the disciples' end, it actually is for those on the other end. Ultimately, supporting all of you to grow in your own faith and both in prayer and evangelization is ultimately, so how is God calling me now to invest in others, to begin to help people, to bring them wherever they may be. Some of you may be called to go all the way to this end where it's all about reaching out to people who feel estranged. Some of you may be called to more on some of these other areas. Right? Not all of us are called to do exactly the same thing. God has a unique role in the body for each of us. So does that kind of make sense that of how the design of this is? It's helping support those that are further along disciples so that we feel as though we're able to then go in the ways in which God is calling us to those who may be further away. Yeah.
Especially in our world right now, so many people that might be on that further end of spiritual desolation. Now, right now, I feel like the secular world is going through a problem where it's not necessarily that they don't believe in God, and it's not that they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. And so they're finding other things to make their God. And so, with people that are on fire and entering that missionary fruitful disciple, you need to be able to go out and reach those people that are misaligned, and our world is very hungry for it right now. They're looking for some guidance and something to believe in. They're just very misaligned on what the right thing is to believe in, and we're kind of becoming a godless society. And so it's kind of all of our obligation. I feel obligated to kind of take it back, take our faith back. Just so, yeah.
Yeah, and we can certainly say, how can we do something like that? How can we do that? We might feel unworthy, that the Lord should send somebody else, shouldn't send me. I'm not the one. You're in good company. The prophets said that all the time. They had all sorts of reasons. I'm too young, I'm too old, I'm too this, I'm too that, I can't speak well. And the Lord usually calls those who feel as though they can't do it, because he can actually use us then. We might feel unequipped. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to share the faith. Well, that's what Ignite is going to help us with. We might feel overwhelmed, like we're going to run out of energy. And it's a daunting task. We've got so many things. And that's really where prayer is going to come in as the source of our ability to do it.